Okay, so are you ready to dive into Blue Monday?
Always up for a good thriller, especially one with a psychological twist.
Yeah, well, this one sounds like it's got a pretty unique hook. It's by Nicci French, and the main character is actually a psychotherapist.
A psychotherapist, huh? Not your typical detective.
No, not at all. But that's what makes it so intriguing. So her name's Frida Klein, and she finds herself caught up in not one, but two kidnapping cases.
Two. Wow. Okay, so that's got to be a lot to juggle. What are we talking about here? Two separate cases, or are they somehow connected?
Well, that's what we're going to find out. From what I gather, the first case happened 18 years before the main events of the book, and it involves a kidnapped girl.
18 years. So that's a cold case then.
Pretty much. And then you have a present-day case with a kidnapped boy.
Okay, I see. So how do they tie together? I mean, besides Frida being involved in both.
Well, it sounds like there's a connection through one of Frida's patients.
Oh, interesting. So she's using her therapy skills to help solve the cases.
Yeah, it seems like it. Her patient describes his, get this, imaginary son.
Imaginary son.
Right. But the details he shares about this imaginary son actually line up with the missing boy.
Oh, wow. Okay, so now it's getting creepy.
Right. So naturally, Frida starts thinking there might be a link. It's a really gripping moment in the book because you're not sure if her intuition is right.
So is she right? I mean, I don't want any spoilers, but
Well, the reviewer doesn't give it all away, but they do say that her initial theory about the patient ends up being a dead end.
oh, so it's a red herring.
Yeah, but even though it's a false lead, it still pushes the story forward.
Right, right. I mean, there's got to be a reason the author put that in there.
Exactly.
Ye-
So even though it's not what she thought it was, it connects Frida to the investigator working on the case, and then through him, she meets the sister of the girl who was kidnapped years ago.
Oh, wow. That's quite a chain of events.
Yeah, it sounds like the author is really good at weaving together these different storylines. And, one thing the reviewer really praised was how the author delves into the criminal mind.
Oh, yeah. That's always interesting in thrillers. Like how they get inside the head of the killer.
Right. And a lot of times they go overboard with those mind-reading tropes, making it feel almost supernatural.
Yeah, it's like they can magically know what the killer's thinking.
Exactly. But with Blue Monday, the reviewer said it felt more grounded in reality, which makes the suspense even more effective.
I can see that. When it's more realistic, it's definitely more believable and scarier in a way, too.
Speaking of suspense, let's talk about that twist ending. The reviewer had some thoughts on that too.
Oh, yeah. Did they like it, or was it a letdown?
Well, they weren't completely sold on it. They felt the twist was a little too obvious.
Oh, predictable. I wonder if that takes away from the enjoyment of the book, or if it creates a different kind of suspense.
That's a good question. It's like watching a horror movie and you know someone's about to jump out. You're still startled even though you expect it.
Yeah, that's true. So knowing the twist is coming doesn't always ruin it.
And, the reviewer compared it to another thriller they read called What My Sister Knew, where the bad guy actually wins. They seem to like stories that kind of flip those usual thriller conventions.
Interesting. So maybe Blue Monday has some surprises in store, even if the main twist is predictable.
Maybe so. But even with that critique, they still recommend it, right?
They did, so it can't be all bad.
Definitely not. And they even called it a perfect one-sitting read. So it sounds like it's a real page-turner.
I like those kinds of books, the ones you just can't put down.
Me too. So let's dive into some of the things the reviewer highlighted as strengths.
Sure. Where should we start?
Well, aside from the fast-paced plot and the believable psychological stuff, they also praise the author's writing style.
Oh, good writing is always a plus.
Right. They described it as mentally engaging.
Makes sense, given Frida's a therapist.
Yeah, you're kind of getting inside her head as she's piecing everything together.
I like that. It's like you're solving the mystery along with her.
Now, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about Frida being an unconventional detective. What do you think about that? Does her being a therapist give her any advantages or disadvantages in these cases?
That's a good question. I think it definitely gives her a different perspective, right? Like, she's not just looking for the who and the how, she's also trying to figure out the why.
So, like she's profiling them before she even knows who they are?
Yeah, sort of. She's trying to understand their motivations, the psychological factors at play.
And that could give her an edge in predicting their next move.
Exactly. But then again, her empathy and understanding of human nature could also make her more vulnerable.
Oh, interesting. Like they could manipulate her.
Yeah, potentially.
Yeah,
Especially if they're master manipulators.
that's a good point. It creates this conflict within her character. Her desire to help but also the reality of dealing with criminals.
Right. That tension must add a lot to the story.
I think so.
Uh,
Now, one more thing that caught my eye was this theme of nature versus nurture.
oh, the age-old debate.
Right. And apparently the book explores it through twins, which is even more complex.
Twins are always fascinating in those kinds of discussions.
Yeah, because they have the same genes, but they might have had completely different experiences.
So it makes you wonder how much of who we are is predetermined and how much is shaped by our environment.
That's the big question, isn't it? I remember reading about those identical twins separated at birth who ended up having like the same careers and hobbies, even the same names for their pets.
I've heard about those cases. It's wild.
Right. It makes you think genes play a bigger role than we realize. But then you have twins raised in the same home who are totally different.
Yeah, that's a complicated issue.
Definitely. Sounds like this book gives us a lot to think about.
It does, and this is just the first book in a series, so who knows what else they'll explore.
Oh, that's right. A whole series to look forward to. So before we wrap up, let's talk about the overall review. Did they ultimately recommend it, even with those critiques we talked about?
Oh, they definitely did. They said it was a great one-sitting read.
So for those who like to devour books in one go, this one might be a good pick. What else did they highlight?
Well, aside from the fast-paced plot and the realistic psychological stuff, they also really like the writing style.
Yeah, they said it was mentally engaging, which makes sense since we're kind of in Frida's head the whole time.
Right, trying to solve the mystery along with her.
Now, before we move on, I'm curious about something. The reviewer described Frida as an unconventional detective. Do you think that's accurate? What makes her so different from other detectives we see in books and movies?
Well, for starters, she's not a police detective. She's a psychotherapist.
Well,
That right there sets her apart.
true. So she's approaching these cases from a whole other angle, using her understanding of human behavior and motivations.
Exactly. She's not just looking for clues and evidence, she's trying to get inside the minds of the kidnappers.
So it's almost like she's profiling them before she even knows who they are.
Yeah, kind of. And that's what I find so fascinating about her character. She's using her expertise in a way we don't often see in this genre.
It's definitely a fresh take on the detective archetype. And I'm also curious about the hole-in-the-floor metaphor that the reviewer mentioned. It sounds like there's some symbolism at play there.
You're right. The reviewer hinted that it represents something deeper about Frida's character. They even mentioned a workman being involved. What do you make of that detail?
That's interesting. On the surface, it's just a physical detail in Frida's home, but symbolically, I wonder if the hole represents some kind of emptiness or lack in her life.
Oh, that's an intriguing thought. Like maybe a past trauma or a hidden vulnerability that she's trying to cover up or ignore.
Exactly. And the fact that a workman is involved suggests that maybe someone is trying to help her fix this hole, whether she wants their help or not.
That's a really insightful interpretation. It adds another layer to the story, suggesting that the mystery Frida's trying to solve might be connected to her own internal struggles.
It's like she's working on two cases simultaneously, the kidnappings and her own personal case.
Exactly. And it makes you wonder if those two cases will ultimately intersect in some way. Will Frida's personal journey of self-discovery influence how she approaches the kidnappings? Or will the darkness of the crimes she's investigating force her to confront her own inner demons?
Those are great questions. It seems like every detail, every symbol, is carefully chosen by the author to add depth and complexity to the story.
And that's what makes a good thriller so engaging. It's not just about the plot twists and the suspense, it's about the characters, their motivations, and the choices they make.
Right. You find yourself invested in their journeys, wanting to see how they navigate the challenges and emerge from the other side. And speaking of journeys, I think it's time for us to embark on our own reading journey with Blue Monday.
I agree. After all, this deep dive has only scratched the surface of what this book has to offer.
We've explored the unconventional protagonist, the intricate kidnapping cases, the believable portrayal of the criminal mind, and those thought-provoking themes. Blue Monday seems to check all the boxes for a gripping psychological thriller.
And it sparked some great questions for us to consider as we read. What does that hole in the floor truly represent? How do Frida's family dynamics shape her actions? And perhaps the most intriguing question of all, will we be able to predict the twist? Or will Nicci French manage to surprise us?
Now that's the million-dollar question. I always love going into a thriller with a sense of anticipation, trying to outsmart the author.
It's like a mental chess match. And even if we do see the twist coming, there's still enjoyment in watching how the author weaves it all together.
Exactly. It's not just about the destination, but the journey itself. And based on this review, Blue Monday promises a journey filled with psychological suspense, intriguing characters, and thought-provoking themes. So to our listeners, as you embark on this reading adventure, I'm curious what stands out to you the most about Blue Monday. What are you most eager to discover as you delve into the pages of this psychological thriller?
It's interesting you should ask that because one thing that struck me was the reviewer's comparison to What My Sister Knew, the book where the antagonist wins. It makes me wonder if Nietzsche French might be playing with our expectations in a similar way in Blue Monday. Will Frida actually succeed in solving these cases? Or could there be a darker, more unexpected outcome that subverts the traditional thriller formula?
Ooh, that's a great point. I'll definitely be reading with that in mind. It's funny because even though the reviewer mentioned a few potential flaws like the predictability of the twist and the somewhat underdeveloped supporting characters, they still highly recommend the book. That speaks volumes about the overall quality of the writing and the strength of Frida's character.
Right. And that's the beauty of reading. We can each bring our own perspectives and experiences to the table. What one reader finds predictable, another might find surprising. What one reader sees as a flaw, another might see as an opportunity for deeper analysis.
Absolutely. And that's what makes these deep dives so much fun. It's a chance to bounce ideas off each other, spark new insights, and ultimately enhance our own reading experiences.
Precisely. So, as you turn the pages of Blue Monday, consider this. How does Frida's unique perspective as a psychotherapist shape the way she approaches these investigations? What are the ethical implications of using psychological insights to solve crimes? And how does the author weave together the various plot threads, the kidnapping cases, Frida's personal life, those thought-provoking themes to create a truly compelling narrative?
Those are some fantastic questions to ponder. I know I'll be thinking about them as I delve into this book. And who knows, maybe we'll revisit Blue Monday in a future episode once we've both had a chance to read it and form our own opinions.
That sounds like a plan. Until then, happy reading.
And happy sleuthing. So it sounds like a pretty compelling read, but before we jump into that, I did want to touch on something else the reviewer mentioned, the other characters.
Yeah, they had some thoughts about this too, didn't they?
They did. They actually pointed out that some of them felt a little unnecessary, almost like they were just there to set up future books.
Oh, I see. Like they didn't quite contribute enough to this particular story?
Exactly. They gave the example of the romance between Frida and a character named Sandy. They felt it was kind of underdeveloped and didn't really add much.
That's a shame. It's tricky to balance a strong main character with a good supporting cast, especially in a series.
Right. You want those side characters to be interesting, but you also don't want them to overshadow the protagonist or distract from the main plot.
It does make you wonder, though, if those supporting characters will play a bigger role in the later books.
I guess we'll have to wait and see. Now, I wanted to go back to Frida for a minute. The reviewer described her as an unconventional detective, which we've talked about a little bit already. But I'm curious, what exactly makes her so unique?
Well, like we said, she's not a police detective. She's coming at this from a completely different angle, using her background in psychotherapy to understand the people involved.
Instead of just focusing on physical clues, she's looking for those psychological breadcrumbs, right?
Exactly. She's trying to get inside the heads of the kidnappers, figure out their motivations, and that's what I find so compelling about her character. It's not something you see every day in a thriller.
Definitely a fresh take. Now, the reviewer also brought up this theme of nature versus nurture, which always makes for an interesting discussion. How does that play into the story?
Well, it seems like the book explores it through the lens of twins.
Twins. Okay, that adds another layer to it.
Right. You've got these two individuals with the same genetic makeup, but their experiences might have been vastly different. So it raises the question of how much of who we are is predetermined and how much is shaped by our environment.
Like those studies about identical twins separated at birth, who end up living similar lives.
Exactly. Those cases are always fascinating because they suggest that genes might play a bigger role than we think. But then you have cases where twins raised in the same home turn out completely different.
So it's this ongoing debate. And I think it's something that's always going to be up for interpretation. But it definitely adds a layer of complexity to the story.
It does. And, as we've been discussing this book, I keep coming back to the hole in the floor metaphor that the reviewer mentioned.
Oh, yeah. The reviewer said it represented something deeper about Frida. They even mentioned a workman. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, on the surface, it's just a physical detail in Frida's home. But symbolically, I wonder if the hole represents some kind of emptiness or lack in her life.
Interesting. like maybe a past trauma or a secret she's hiding.
Yeah, something like that. And then the workman being involved, it suggests that maybe someone is trying to help her fix this hole, whether she wants the help or not.
It almost adds a whole other layer to the mystery. Like Frida's working on two cases at once, the kidnappings and her own personal case.
Exactly. It makes you wonder if those two cases will end up connecting in some way.
That's a great point. Will solving the kidnappings help her heal that hole inside? Or will confronting her own demons be the key to unlocking the mysteries?
Lots of questions to ponder, and I think that's what makes a good thriller so captivating. It's not just about the plot, it's about the characters, their inner struggles, and how they evolve throughout the story.
I agree. So are you ready to dive into Blue Monday and see for ourselves?
Absolutely, this deep dive has definitely piqued my interest.
I know I'm hooked. And for our listeners, as you start reading Blue Monday, here are some questions to keep in mind. How does Frida's background as a psychotherapist influence her approach to these cases?
Hmm.
And will she be able to piece together the puzzle before it's too late?
And don't forget about that hole in the floor.
Yeah.
What do you think it represents? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Yeah, and what's really interesting is the ethical side of things.
Oh, you mean like using therapy techniques to solve crimes?
Exactly. Is it crossing a line? Where does therapy end and investigation begin?
That's a good point. I mean, Frida is a therapist first and foremost.
Right. So does that create a conflict of interest?
I hadn't thought about it like that. It definitely adds another layer to the whole story.
And speaking of layers, the reviewer did mention something else that caught my attention.
What's that?
Frida's family. Apparently, her sister and niece play a role in revealing her true self.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just about the cases. There's a personal element to it as well.
Yeah, it seems like it. Family dynamics can be pretty powerful, can't they?
They can. They can be a source of strength, but also a lot of baggage sometimes.
Exactly. And it sounds like the author explores both sides of that with Frida's character.
I'm curious to see how that all plays out. And, going back to what we were talking about before, about the reviewer still recommending the book, even with those critiques, it makes me think that those flaws might actually be part of what makes it so interesting.
Yeah, sometimes those imperfections can make a story feel more real, more relatable.
Exactly. I mean, nobody's perfect in real life, right?
Hmm.
So why should characters be any different?
That's true. And it can make their triumphs even more satisfying.
And their struggles more heartbreaking.
Exactly. So even if the twist is predictable or some characters feel underdeveloped, there's still a lot to appreciate about Blue Monday.
Definitely. It sounds like a book that will stay with you long after you finish reading it.
I think so.
Yeah,
And it's definitely sparked a lot of interesting conversations between us.
it has. And hopefully it'll do the same for our listeners. So if you're looking for a gripping psychological thriller with a unique protagonist and thought-provoking themes, Blue Monday might be right up your alley.
And if you do give it a read, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Let us know if you were able to predict the twist, what you thought about the characters, and how those ethical dilemmas resonated with you.
Until next time, happy reading, everyone.
Happy reading.